Right, so this is the thesis statement that I'm going to base my rankings off. It's just going to be 22 to 1, no tiers or anything. Just going to, individually rank each one, and it's going to follow the desensitization of violence thesis statement that I just showed you. So let's just get it started. Number 22, last place I have On the Rainy River. This one, for the entire book, it's very important. It's a very notable chapter. But for this thesis, and at least for the desensitization of violence, is actually kind of the opposite. On page 39, he talks about how blood made him queasy, which is the complete opposite of desensitization to blood and violence. And the blood he was talking about was just the blood of animals working at a slaughterhouse. So it's notable because it shows the transformation that he feels after going to Vietnam and how he becomes desensitized to violence after that. But at least for before he goes to Vietnam, he's not like that. Moving on, number 21 is Good Form. This is a very short chapter. It's like a page long, and it really doesn't cover anything of desensitization of violence. It discusses why some of the stories are fake in Vietnam and why sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes the true story is not even the real one. It's a strange inclusion in the book, but it definitely doesn't fit this thesis statement. Number 20 is going to be Stockings. This one notably covers the good luck charm for Henry Dobbins as well as other good luck charms that the other soldiers use while at the war. Number 19 is going to be Love. This one is also a pretty short chapter. It covers Jimmy Cross coming to visit O'Brien's house in the future. They don't really cover desensitization at all, but they do talk about Martha and some other stuff from the war. So it's a little more connected to the desensitization theme than the previous three. So that's why it gets number 19. Next up is number 18, which is really the first one from these rankings that we can actually truly connect to the desensitization theme, and that is Notes. The reason that it's notable is because it covers Norman Bowker's suicide. He gets a note in the mail, O'Brien does, and he really doesn't react to it at all. He doesn't have a reaction, and he's kind of desensitized to it. So that's why it's the first one that actually covers it. That's going to go number 18. Number 17 is going to be Church. This was a pretty strange chapter, I thought, when I first read it. It just showed how much violence there is in the actual, Vietnam War in general, because there were, monks who were polishing guns in a church, which was, obviously should never happen. A church is a sacred place, but in the face of war, things like that are going to happen, and it just shows, especially for the monks, for their viewpoint, how much they have been desensitized to the violence. That even they have to help with the fight. At number 16 is another one from after his fighting days, and that's Field Trip. So O'Brien returns to Vietnam with his daughter to reminisce on the area where he fought, and he's struggling to try to feel any kind of sadness or any emotion because he really can't recognize the area that he fought in. There's a quote on page 178. It had a rough, chalky sound, full of things I did not know were there. So he wants to be sad and he wants to think about all his friends like Kiowa that died while fighting, but he can't, and he becomes desensitized to it. He just can't feel anything. And then next up, number 15 is Ghost Soldiers. So O'Brien is furious at this new medic, Bobby Jorgensen, for botching his surgery. It becomes kind of a laughingstock because he can't really do anything. And he gets so furious, so him and this other soldier, Azar, start playing tricks on Bobby Jorgensen, with ghosts, making him think he's going insane. But at the very end, him and Jorgensen make up. And what makes this, so, memorable, and what makes it not, so low, is that he jokes about killing Azar at the end. You probably shouldn't be saying these things, but, in war, you become desensitized to death. You start saying these kind of things. Number 14 is the first chapter of the book, and that's the things they carried. It's a very important chapter. It establishes the characters, sets the basis for what's going to happen in the rest of the book. But what's very important about it, at least for the desensitization theme, is at the very end of the chapter, they completely burn down a Vietnamese village because they think that someone that wronged their platoon is from there. They have no remorse, no feelings of sympathy. They don't care that they burned down a village with women and children, or just people that weren't associated with the guy that completely was an enemy to the platoon. So that's why it gets number 14. Number 13 is Speaking of Courage. This is from the perspective of Norman Bowker and how he, feels guilty about Kiowa's death, but it's for a different reason. He feels guilt because he thinks he would have won the Silver Star if Kiowa didn't die. So obviously he wanted Kiowa to survive, but really a main reason why he feels so bad about it is although he won all these other medals and he speaks to his dad about it, he didn't win the Silver Star, and if Kiowa had survived, he would have won it. So this kind of shows, he really doesn't feel any remorse for Kiowa and, his family. He's just kind of upset that he didn't win it. So it's kind of selfish a little bit. Number 12 is just a very bizarre chapter. It's The Dentist. Kurt Lemon has to go to, get his checkup at the dentist, and he is claiming that he has like a nail-like pain in his tooth. So he demands the dentist to, pull the tooth out, even though there seems to be no issue at all. And it seems like he just wants to seem like a tough guy or something, just pulling his tooth. And this kind of shows, desensitization to violence for himself. He doesn't care if it, it hurts or he's pulling a tooth that will have irreversible damage for the rest of his life. He just has to, seem tough and, impress all the other soldiers. Number 11, so we're getting into the top half, is The Man I Killed. So definitely for O'Brien, he feels bad about it. He feels emotional about it. But it's Kiowa, who tries to make it seem like, hey, it's actually, it's not that bad. It is war. People are going to die. So, he puts a tarp over the dead Vietnamese soldier's dead body. And he also, on page 120, there's a quote. He tells O'Brien, all right, let me ask a question. You want to trade plays with him? Turn it all upside down? You want that? I mean, be honest. And this is going to show up in some of the next couple of chapters too. It's that, hey, he's dead, but at least you're not dead. And that's just the reality of war. And it shows a desensitization of violence. That, hey, you need to be grateful that you're alive, and it is what it is. Into the top 10, we have In the Field. This is, just like I was just talking about, they discuss Kiowa's death, but through the perspective that, hey, it could be worse. That's an actual quote on page 167. Henry Dobbins says, it could be worse. And you know what they're talking about? Hey, you could be dead. So he's dead, but you're alive. And at the end of the day, that's war, and that's all you can ask for. And that was, it's the reality of their situation. Number 9 is Ambush, and this is a continuation of O'Brien talking about the Vietnamese boy that he killed. And what makes it so memorable is this quote on page 128 about how he talks about, sometimes I forgive myself, other times I don't. So, sometimes he forgives himself for killing this boy in the heat of war, even though, he thinks about it so much. Sometimes, he thinks about it through the perspective that it's war and, things like this are going to happen. So it is what it is. Number 8 is Nightlife, and this whole chapter covers how Rat Kiley completely loses his mind because he sees so much gore, so much violence. The desensitization, it gets to his head, and he starts having these visions that massive bugs are eating at him. And on page 212, there's a quote, the whole war, it's just one big banquet, meat man, you and me, everybody, meat for the bugs. And then he also, he shoots himself, and that, it doesn't really have a huge impact either on the rest of the platoon. They kind of saw it coming. They saw him going insane, so it really didn't have a huge impact on him. And it should. One of their friends, one of their comrades, shot himself and ended his own life. So it should be a bigger deal. But it shows how they've been desensitized to the violence as well. Number 7 is The Lives of the Dead, which is the last chapter in the book. What makes this so memorable for desensitization, and it could have even gone higher because of this, is that they have this tradition in the platoon that they have to shake the hand of a dead Vietnamese man, an old Vietnamese man. And, O'Brien is a little, kind of weirded out by this, but the rest of the soldiers just, they say, hey, it's fine. You're just shaking the hand of an old man, a nice old man. That shouldn't be happening. The dead man should be elsewhere, but it just shows how desensitized all of these soldiers have been to the violence. Number 6 is Sweetheart of the Song Trebong, and this is a very long chapter. I want to say it's 20, 25 pages long, and it talks about how the relationship between Fosse and Marianne Bell just fell apart, and it was for a weird reason. Marianne Bell comes to Vietnam with her, her lover since they were really young, and she becomes, sort of this soldier. She shaves her head. She becomes this completely different person, and a very, very important quote and memorable that shows her transformation on page 105. She had a necklace of human tongues. Yeah, that's weird. She completely goes off the rails and their relationship falls apart. But that necklace of human tongues just shows, that's so weird. And it shows how desensitized she has been just being in Vietnam for a couple of weeks. She becomes this person that she, wasn't before. And that gives it number 6. Number 5 is friends. And this is a kind of a part 2 to enemies, which is going to be one of the next couple of chapters that I talk about. Dave Jensen and Lee Strunk are 2 soldiers, young guys, and they come to a pact that if one of them gets a wheelchair wound, they're just going to kill them immediately. They think death is a better option than being in a wheelchair wound. So they don't actually understand what death is like, and they think it's just, it's not that bad. And we know that they experience this because on page 63, Lee Strunk actually does experience a wheelchair wound, and he begs Jensen not to kill him and to break the pact. This shows that, at least before, they don't actually know what they're talking about, and it really shows they're just, they're high school kids, teenage kids. They don't know what they're talking about, and they become so desensitized to death that they think that's a viable option, and they'd rather be dead than just live with a minor wound for the rest of their life. Number 4 is style, and this is a page long, but it's very notable from the Vietnamese girl's standpoint. So she is outside of her burning house. All of her things, all of her, her family, they're inside the house. And what does she do? She's sitting outside and she's dancing. Very, very strange reaction. She's dancing. It's a Vietnamese ritual, but she's not feeling any kind of pain, any sadness. She's not yelling or anything. She's like 9 years old and she's dancing. She's been so desensitized to the violence in the Vietnamese area that even seeing her house burning down isn't any different than what you would normally see. Number 3 is enemies, the one I was just talking about, which is the part 1 to friends. So Dave Jensen and Lee Strunk, before they were friends, they were enemies, as the name of the chapter suggests. They got in a fight because one of them stole the other's pocket knife. So they start having this massive argument, and Dave Jensen eventually takes out his gun and starts firing everywhere. From page 60, that's the quote, just firing and yelling, and it didn't stop until he'd rattled off an entire magazine of ammunition. It's a pocket knife, and he's on your side, but because they've been so desensitized to just shooting on orders, that's why they're there, is just to shoot for no reason. They become so desensitized to it that Dave Jensen just thinks he can just start shooting everywhere, an entire magazine of ammunition, it just said, and that just, shows that that's what he's trained to do, and that's what he's doing even in a seemingly minor argument. Number 2 is going to be spin. So O'Brien talks in this chapter about how war wasn't all terror and violence, and sometimes things could almost get sweet. At face value, this probably shouldn't be very high, but they're at war, they're shooting people every day, and even the stories that he chooses in this chapter aren't even they aren't all sweet. They cover topics like death and damp fungal scent of an empty body bag. These aren't sweet stories, but they were sweet considering the actual face of battle and considering some of the things that they did see. But they've become so desensitized that even O'Brien thinks that some of these stories are actually sweet. So that leaves number 1, which was pretty obviously my choice, and that's how to tell a true war story. Yeah, this chapter was really, really messed up. Where do we start? First off, when O'Brien refers to Kurt's death as almost beautiful, when he stepped on a grenade and his body flew everywhere. Yeah, that was crazy. And then also the big one is the water buffalo scene. Torturing a water buffalo just for fun. These guys are doing a bunch of messed up things. They've been so desensitized to violence, and and just murder. It's not good. And this whole chapter, that's all it covers. So it's definitely going to be number one. Breaking down the whole list, I'm going to show a screen right here that has 1 through 22 listed off. So yeah, that's it. See ya.